the cold stone of the Acropolis pressed against their knees. The Athenian women huddled, listening to the city burn below. The air was thick with smoke, the taste of ash. They waited for the immortals. They waited for the brutal, expected end, the quick sword, the fire, the predictable chaos of a sacking. That was the story of war. The great bronze doors splintered, the Persians flooded in, but the soldiers stopped. They did not raise their blades. Behind them came men in robes holding scrolls and ink. These men looked bored. They walked through the screaming, terrified crowd, scanning faces. They pointed. That one. Her. For the Susa looms. The one with the light hair. For the king's house. This was not a massacre. It was an inventory. The women had prayed to be spared a violent death. They were about to learn that the Persians had a different, colder definition of spoil. We are venturing into a darkness others are afraid to see. Subscribe to walk this path with us. Hit the bell. Let it be your signal when we unseal the next forbidden chapter. And now, back to the story. We are told a clean story. Everyone knows it. Xerxes, the god king. His pride wounded by a tiny, stubborn city. He crosses the Hellespont on a bridge of boats, whipping the sea itself for disobedience. He is not a man. He is a force of nature, a storm. Thermopylae is just a delay. Artemisium, a sideshow. He moves south. The target? Athens, the heart of the rebellion. The narrative we are fed is one of pure, primal rage. Themistocles, the pragmatist, knows the city cannot be held. The oracle's wooden walls are ships. The city is evacuated. The men, to the fleet at Salamis. The women and children, scattered, fled to Trozen, to Aegina. Athens is left empty, a ghost city offered to the Persian torch. This is the story Herodotus tells, the story Athens wanted the world to remember. Xerxes arrives. He stands on the Areopagus, looking at the silent Acropolis, and he gives the order. Not an order to occupy, an order to destroy. The immortals, his elite, are unleashed, but not just them, the whole horde. Medes, Scythians, tributaries, drunk on the promise of plunder. They are depicted as animals. The smell of burning olive groves fills the air. The sound of marble, cracking from intense heat. The screams, disorganized, random. The Acropolis is the true target. Sacrilege. That is the point. The few diehards barricaded behind wooden gates are butchered, their bodies thrown from the sacred rock. This is the core of the crime. The temples are looted. The peplos of Athena, woven for months, is torn and spat upon. The statues of the gods are smashed. The sacred olive tree, the gift of Athena herself, burned to the stump. This is the meaning of the story, the hubris of the Persian, the barbarism of the East, and the women? The daughters of Hellas? In this public story, they are collateral damage. They are the few who could not evacuate. The old, the infirm, the priests and priestesses who refused to leave their gods. Their fate is presented as quick, chaotic, and terrible. Caught by the flames in their homes, hacked down by drunken soldiers looking for wine, dragged away as personal plunder, their names lost, their identities erased by the smoke. Yes, they are tragic figures. But their tragedy is part of the fire. They are victims of rage, not policy. They are symbols of Athenian helplessness, not targets of Persian strategy. The horror is the heat, the uncontrolled, primitive anger of an empire that does not understand civilization. This story served Athens. It was perfect propaganda. It made them the absolute victim of barbarian fury. It united the fractured Greek states. It fueled the thirst for revenge. The Parthenon was built on this ash. The Oath of Plataea declared, "Never rebuild the destroyed temples. Leave them as an eternal monument, a physical scar to show the world." This is what barbarians do. All focus was on the stones, the violation of the sacred. The crime was against the gods. The women were simply lost. Their individual fates were irrelevant next to the great sacrilege. They dissolved into the abstract horror. The story was simple. It was powerful. It painted the Persians as savages, capable only of destruction. They came. They saw. They burned. It was a brutal, simple system. The logic of the barbarian. Pure, hot rage, or so it seemed. But there was one detail. A detail buried in the texts, ignored for centuries. Herodotus himself, the father of this very story, mentions scribes. He mentions Persian commanders interrogating the survivors. Why would a barbarian in a fit of rage stop to ask questions? Why would an army intending only to burn a city drag its entire civil administration with it? The archaeologists faced the same problem. The fire was real, but it was precise. It was set after the looting, and the looting itself was selective. They took cult statues, but left heavier, less useful, votive gifts. This was not the signature of a drunken horde. It was the signature of an appraiser. The story was neat. It was carved in stone, and it was a lie. The narrative of chaotic fire begins to splinter under examination. The fire was real. The temples did burn. But the archaeology and the Persians' own records show this was the second phase. The first phase was quiet. The evidence was not found in Athens. It was found, decades later, buried in the administrative ruins of the Persian capital, Persepolis. The Persepolis fortification tablets. They are not glorious battle reports. They are not hymns to a god-king. They are payrolls, rations lists, administrative spreadsheets carved in cuneiform clay, and these dry, boring records list with chilling, bureaucratic precision. Athenian workers, Ionian artisans, Greek specialists. These lists are meticulous. They detail food allotments, so much wine, so much grain. They describe skills, weavers of the high loom, potters, tutors, court musicians. This is not the language of a barbarian horde. It is the language of a human resources department. The Greek historians, obsessed with the shame of the defeat, focused on the fire. They wrote about the insult to their gods. They claimed all of Athens fled to Salamis before Xerxes arrived. This was a comforting, necessary lie. The men, the rowers for the new navy, the soldiers, they fled. But thousands were left behind. The old, the sick, and the women. Specifically, the high-status women trapped in the Acropolis and the artisan-class women in their workshops. They were the ones who met the scribes. Why the discrepancy? Why would the Persians, capable of such overwhelming, brutal force, bother with paperwork? Why meticulously catalog the survivors of a city they intended to erase? The answer is cold. The city was not the target. The land was not the prize. The people were. The immortals were not a vanguard of destruction. They were security. They established a perimeter. The scribes moved in. They were not looking for gold statues. Gold is heavy. Gold is inert. They were looking for skill. They were looking for bloodlines. They separated the population. The old and useless, discarded, put to the sword. The real massacre was just housekeeping. But the women, They were assessed, not with the chaotic violence of a sack, but with the cold, appraising stare of a buyer. A weaver whose hands showed the skill of the sacred peplos. A potter who understood the secrets of the black figure technique. A daughter of an archon, valuable for a political marriage, or as a high-status servant in the Susa palace. This was not abduction. It was procurement. The public story of fire and fury was horrific, but the truth was worse. The horror was not the loss of life. It was the systematic repurposing of it. The public story tells of a sacked city. The real story is that of a city audited. Imagine the scene. The Acropolis. The women are not being brutalized by a frenzied mob. They are being processed. The soldiers stand guard, forming a perimeter, not to keep the women in, but to keep the chaos out. A soldier who damaged one of these women, a skilled weaver, a daughter of a noble house, would not be rewarded. He would be punished for destroying state property. This is the twist. The great barbarian invasion was a meticulously planned corporate takeover. The men with the scrolls were not priests. They were assessors. They moved through the huddled groups. They examined hands. They looked for the calluses of a loom, the stained fingers of a vase painter. They examined faces, posture, clothing, assessing status, bloodline. A quick, quiet question. Your father? Your husband? A notation is made on a clay tablet. Item 104, female, approx. 20 years. Skill, high loom weaver, attic style. Consigned to Susa Textile Works. Item 105, female, approx. 16 years. Father, Eupatrid line. Consigned to Persepolis, House of the King. This was the true mechanism. Cold, efficient, inhuman. The women were not dragged away in chains. They were marched out in organized columns. They were added to the supply train. They were given rations. Their names were entered into the imperial ledger. The Persepolis tablets prove this. They name these Greek women. They list their jobs. They list their pay. They were not slaves being whipped in a quarry. They were employees. Forced employees of the Persian state, their skills and bodies strip-mined from their homeland and plugged directly into the imperial machine. The finest weavers of Athens were now making tapestries for Persian satraps. The daughters of the Athenian elite were now serving wine to their conquerors, or bearing them children. Their identity was not destroyed, it was absorbed. This was the real violation. Not a hot, chaotic rage, but a cold, bureaucratic erasure. The Greeks mourned their dead, but these women were not dead. They were gone, assimilated. Their children would grow up speaking Persian, serving a Persian king. Within a generation, their Athenian blood would be just one more ingredient in the vast, multicultural empire. This was a fate worse than a quick death on the Acropolis steps. It was the complete, systematic theft of their future. And the fire? The grand symbolic destruction of Athens? That came after. After the valuable assets had been cataloged, secured, and marched away. The burning of Athens was not an act of rage. It was an act of sanitation. It was throwing away the packaging after the valuable contents had been removed. This was the true mechanism. Inhuman. Precise. But why? Why create the lie? Why the elaborate, fiery cover-up? The lie wasn't to protect the victims. The lie was to protect the Persians, to hide their true purpose. Theft. Not the theft of gold, but the theft of skill. The true purpose was not conquest, it was theft. The Persian Empire was not a horde, it was a corporation, and it ran on talent. Greece, and especially Athens, was not just a military rival. It was a resource pool. They had the finest vase painters. They had the most advanced textile weavers. They had potters with techniques the Persians coveted. They had sculptors, tutors, and thinkers. Xerxes did not want to destroy this value. He wanted to transfer it, relocate it, to Susa, to Persepolis, to the imperial heartland. This was not war. It was industrial asset stripping. This is why the scribes came first, to tag the inventory. This is why the immortals were just guards, to protect the valuable assets from the rest of the army and from the fire. The women were the prize. Their wombs were a resource. Their hands were a resource. Their bloodlines were a resource. So why the lie? Why the grand, theatrical fire? The fire was the perfect misdirection. First, it concealed the method. It hid the true, cold, bureaucratic nature of the Persian state. The Persians wanted the Greeks to think of them as emotional, raging barbarians. Barbarians are chaotic. They can be outsmarted. They are predictable in their rage. A state that inventories its victims before deporting them. That is a different kind of monster. It is a monster of logic. It is inescapable. The fire was a mask. Second, the myth served the Greeks. It is less shameful to be overwhelmed by a barbarian firestorm. It is epic. It is tragic. It earns you sympathy. It is profoundly, deeply humiliating to be processed, to be sorted like cattle, to have your wife and daughters inspected, valued, and cataloged on a clay tablet by a foreign clerk. It means you were not just beaten, you were harvested. The Athenians needed the story of the fire to hide this specific shame. They needed to believe their city was destroyed in passion, not harvested for parts. The sacking of Athens was a shared lie, a lie of convenience. The Persians used it to look terrifying. The Greeks used it to hide their humiliation. This perfect, dark system, how did it finally break? It didn't. The Persians won. They got the women. They got the skills. The women were absorbed. They vanished from Greek history and into the Persian ledgers. The truth did not come out. It was buried. It was buried under the ashes of Persepolis itself, when Alexander the Great arrived more than a century later. Alexander actually did what Xerxes only pretended to do. He burned the Persian capital in a real fit of rage and policy. And that fire fired the clay. It baked the administrative records, the payrolls, the lists. It accidentally preserved the evidence. The truth was saved by the next fire, the next conqueror. It lay silent for 2 millennia. We read the Greek histories, the tales of smoke and heroism. But the Persian accounting tablets tell the cold, brutal story. The names, the rations, the job titles. Athenian weaver, Greek tutor. The evidence was not in the story of the war. It was in the receipts. So what was worse than the quick, expected sword? It was the cold hand of the assessor, the clay tablet, the inventory. It was being inspected, valued, and processed like grain. The Persians hid their true purpose, the systematic theft of human skill and bloodlines, behind the mask of a barbarian's chaotic fire. The real horror wasn't the smoke. It wasn't the flames. It was the ledger. It was the realization that you were not a victim of rage. You were an asset being relocated. The real horror was the lie. We have recorded another chapter, but the darkness in this chronicle is endless. If you believe this must be remembered, subscribe to this archive. Press like as your seal upon this record, and hit the bell. Let it toll for those whose names we must remember.